इसका तो मैंने खोल दिया
All right, I guess we can get started. How's that homework? The grocery is? You guys reviewed it with Deepak and them on Saturday? All right.
No.
Okay, so you guys can go over it this Saturday. So make sure individually just kind of go over it with them and see what part you're missing. So today's will be like the first day to get started with selenium, which is not a big deal, but so today's class, a little bit of introduction, and then get all the installation done. I'm gonna write a simple test scripts, and I want to make sure everybody is able to run this on your machine before you leave today, so you can kind of work on the homework, right? So the first part will be lecture plus some coding, and the second part is just individually, individually just kind of make sure everyone is able to run it, right? Everyone online, so Deepak will kind of guide you through that. And for the homework would be just gonna play around with it, write some new test cases and so forth, right? So I guess we can also open up this website. So this is the official site for Selenium. You don't really have to kind of go through it, but that's pretty much the official site. But what is Selenium, right? So that comes down to a little bit of explanation. So Selenium WebDriver is the most important component of the Selenium tools suite. WebDriver API, which provides a simple and more concise programming interfaces. The following image will give you a fair understanding of Selenium components and test automation tools, right? So Selenium provides a few different things, but you can think of it's just a library, like similar to what we had. Date was a library, right? Our simple date format. What else? Library scanner, right? These were kind of a different library. Selenium is in the same way. Like, what is the purpose of the date library?
The date library?
Yeah.
To store some data, some information, so everyone has access to it.
Right, so you kind of deal with dates, right? Tomorrow, so, but anything related to date, right? So when you think of Selenium, it's anything related to something that a manual tester performs manually, right? So what are some of the things the manual tester performs, or a user, for instance, right? So you enter data into a text field, you click on a button, or you go into a URL, right? Something that you do every day, right? So Selenium, what they did is they created a numerous method to make sure automate that process, right? What you can kind of just you can kind of just get them and start to use them on your own project, right? Now, where to click on it, where to enter data, all of those things are different, right? From application to application, it's going to be different. But the common ground here is that whatever, when it comes to click, it doesn't matter if it's a financial app, or if it's an e-commerce app, or if it's a pharmaceutical app. It doesn't matter. Click is a click, long as you deal with the browser. So anything that a user interacts with the browser, which is common for all applications, Selenium has written those methods for us that we can just use. Make sense? But this is not a library that comes with by default from your when you download Java. See, with date and with scanner, it was available for us. When we try to use it, it was there. But when it comes to libraries such as Selenium, it's not there, right? It's someone else wrote it, and it's not needed for every single Java project. It's very only needed for test automation based project, right? So therefore, it's not there by default. So we have to figure out a way to kind of get that from some sort of a marketplace where it's being stored and get them into our project and so forth. But before we get there, let's just go over this high level diagram. So prior to Selenium 2.0, it was Selenium 1.0. You can pretty much ignore that, right? It's been deprecated since, it's still probably there, but like 2009 or 10, right? So Selenium 2.0 is pretty much the one that we're going to be using. 2.0 or 3.0, it doesn't matter. It's the same architecture. So you have your WebDriver, and it communicates with Firefox, Chrome, or any type of browsers. Right? Even it can communicate with mobile browsers, but we use different things for mobile. But if you look at the older architecture, it used to actually run through another funnel, like a Selenium server, and then communicate with your code base, right? But now we can directly communicate with the browsers through WebDriver, right? So this is the one we are learning, right? This is kind of what we are focusing on. And then you have Selenium Grid, which is your test hub, test node. This is like, let's say if you were to run the test on different browsers, operating system / browser combinations. So let's say your requirement is to run tests on Safari and Mac, but it could be Safari version, let's say 5 and version 6. So you need to configure different machines with different setups, right? So you can't have 2 Safaris on the same machine, right? Or so let's say if you need to run a test on Chrome and Windows, Chrome and Mac. So you have to configure all of those servers, but this is beyond kind of the scope of everything we have to do in this class, right? But high level, we are going to do this toward the end of our Selenium lectures. What's going to happen is instead of using a local crowd, instead of us installing all this on different machines and running the test, we're going to actually leverage a cloud-based service, right? That is already there, like things like SourceLab, Device Farm, right? So these companies provides this service to us for, and you have to pay for it. But most of the companies that you're going to work with, they're probably going to have it, right? Doing this manually in your warehouse is very expensive, right? So, we're just going to be leveraging some cloud service to give us that option. So that's another thing. But under the hood, they're also using a technology called Selenium Grid, right? So we can run multiple tests. Like let's say if you have 100 tests, and if you run a single threaded, right, which is like one after another, let's say it takes 100 minutes to, it's probably not going to take 100 minutes, but let's say 100 minutes, right? And it might be really long, right? We don't want the test to take that long, right? And you can cut that down to 10 minutes. Let's say if we were to run on 10 different machines at once, right? Because all tests are independent. And we'll talk about test data. If the test data and the tests are independent, it doesn't matter which one runs first, which ones run last, right? As long as they all run. And if we run it on 10 different machines at once, which is multi-threaded, right? And that's when you have to use the help of Selenium Grid or the library that uses Selenium Grid under the hood, right? So, like I said, this is a little bit more complex of how the architecture is designed. What you're going to learn is at least how to use it, right? I don't expect any of you guys to go into your first job and set up a Selenium Grid, right? It requires a lot of networking knowledge. You have to know how, those Linux servers and all of those, a lot of those AWS commands and things like that. So that's kind of a little bit outside the scope of what objective is. But what you really have to know is how to use it, right? Because you're probably going to be in an environment where they're using a SourceLab. Because you're not going to run a test on your machine, right? That's nonsense. So what you're going to do is you're going to run it on some of those services. As long as you know how to use one of those services, you should be fine with all of them. Then comes a plugin. We don't really. They're deprecated now. And then there's another plugin called Selenium IDE, which is kind of a record and playback. So you record your scenario and then you can play back garbage, right? What we're going to be using instead of these is something called cron path, right? It's to locate an elements, right? And don't worry about what that is right now. We're going to go over that in a little bit. But this is the one we are doing, right? So WebDriver, Selenium WebDriver is what your focus is for rest of the class, right? Rest of the Selenium course, at least. Okay. We can dive in a little bit deeper now how it works as far as architecture goes, right? So Selenium WebDriver API provides. So you might see a lot of different terms. They might say WebDriver API. They might say WebDriver library, right? They might say WebDriver tool, testing tool. But all that means is it's the same thing, right? It's just a different websites or different company may use a different term. But I like to use API, which provides a communication facility between languages and browsers. So there are 4 basic components on WebDriver architecture, which is being Selenium language binding. So you have a different layer, right? So you have to have your language level, right? This is where we are writing our test. And then we communicate with Selenium WebDriver, which is the service that provides us all those functionalities such as click, clear, send keys, go to the URL, all those common functions. And then based on those it communicates with the browser. So browsers are all of these browsers. So what this layer, what it uses is JSON where protocol. So the way you communicate between, again, you don't have to worry about this. This is just under the hood, but I like to go over this so you're not completely blind to what you're doing, right? But you're really not gonna see any of these things. This is how Selenium has been built. So binding layer, you can write Selenium tests, or you can write tests on any languages, such Python, Java, Node.js, Ruby, or C#, right? So it doesn't matter what language is that, as long as they all are supported by Selenium. Does that make sense? So that's why I tell you, like, long as you're good with any of those languages, you should be fine, right? Now Java has the most documentation and support out online. These are open source technologies, so there's no, like, you can't call like 1-800 number and someone to help you, right? It's like you have to figure it out yourself, and your only help is your community. So there is a Selenium community, and everyone kind of asks questions and answers and so forth. The communication layer between them is JSON Wire Protocol. Don't worry too much about this one, but that's how we communicate between the WebDriver and the languages, right? And then you have your browser driver, right? So browser driver is something that stays within Selenium, and then that browser driver allows you to speak to a specific browser, right? So you have your WebDriver, it's kind of the parent of all the drivers, right? But then you have to be more specific. Hey, I need to run the test in Safari. I need to run then you have to have a Safari driver that has to drive the test there, because these are all different technologies that they use to build these browsers, right? And then if it's a Chrome, the one we're going to probably most likely use is a Chrome, right? That's what the 72% of the user uses these days, which is Chrome. So all these browsers are supported through WebDriver. So any browsers that you want to run test on, but the communication, your language sends a request to the WebDriver, WebDriver sends the request to your browser. So your test goes through WebDriver, and WebDriver pretty much communicates with your browser. Make sense? And it's a back and forth, right? So once you send the request to the browser, let's say you're looking for an element and it's not found, it's going to give you back the response, true or false, and based on that, you can perform an actions how you want to perform it, right? Whatever you want to do with that at that point. Any questions? Right? Let's go into installation now. Do we install Homebrew? Do we do it? Okay, that's fine. If we didn't do it, we did it, right? But if we didn't do it, we can do it real quick. So first installation, I would like for everyone to install Homebrew, and don't do it now, right? That's good. That's the steps. We are going to do it after the break, right? I just really need you to focus today. And then we are going to be installing something called Maven, right? So what is in Homebrew, right? So if we go into this site, so you go to Homebrew, right? And then you pretty much just copy this and open your terminal. I'm not going to do that because I already have it, but you will copy this, open your terminal, and dump it here, right? So this is, I think we did it at some point, but anyhow, doesn't matter. The next step is what you really need to do is you have to install something called Maven, right? So we've been creating Java project, which is fine. Maven is also a Java project, but it's a wraparound. Well, let's go back to Homebrew one more time. So this is a package manager for Mac operating system and Linux system, right? So let's say when you're installing software, you're accustomed to going to a website, download the installer, and then go through these clicks, and then eventually it installs it. Make sense? That's how we've been doing. With Brew, it can actually do it through like sort of a backend, right? You run a command, you say, hey, install this for me, and it will install it for you. So it's just very convenient to do it. I think for Windows, it's something called Chocolatey or something like that. So if you're using Windows, whoever that is, deal with your own problem. But and then we have install Maven, right? So Maven, just high level what Maven is. It's just a package manager. Don't make it too complicated. It's a build and a package manager for Java. So the Homebrew is a package manager for entire Mac operating system. But the Maven is a package manager for Java-based libraries. So when we think of like um, Selenium or TestNG or Cucumber, we need to manage these libraries, the versioning, right? Or where, like, so that everyone is using the same version or same source code, so to speak, right? So when you think of that, we need to, we will do this through another layer top of a Java project, which will be Maven, right? So going forward, when we create our project, it should be Maven project instead of a Java project. But it is still Java, but it's just that we call it Maven because that's what it kind of keeps everything together, so to speak, right? So that's what we're going to be doing next. And then we need to install something called Chrome driver. So yes, we have Selenium, but we also need a Chrome driver that is built by Google so that we can actually run our test too. So the Google needs to trust that where the request is coming from, right? Is this some sort of scam or whatever? So they have built a package for us. So hey, you can make the communication to my browser, but it has to go through Chrome driver, right? And then you need to add WebDriver dependency. That's what we're going to be doing. Get from Maven repository. So once you create a Maven project, so Maven has a marketplace where all the Java libraries that are available that we can use, external libraries, not the internal ones that we've been using like scanner, date, etc. But now we need to actually create, or tomorrow you can create a library and publish it in Maven marketplace and other people can use it, right? So that's what we're going to be focusing on. And then also we will be using TestNG dependency, which is also another Maven. We'll get it from Maven dependency. We'll get it from Maven repository and use for test management and assertion. So we need to manage our test as well, right? But we're going to be ultimately using Cucumber for that. But I like to use TestNG for assertion. So let's see when I compare two values, is this value equals to the other value, right? And or if you want to say if this value is this variable empty, right? So we can actually write a code, right? If else and all that. We don't have to do all of this. There is a library that can be used to do it a lot of much more convenient way. And then finally we have to use cronpath plugin, so used for locating web elements on web page. So how do we locate an element? How do we find a specific path to that element? So we'll learn how to do this and once we get there. But for now, the way we install anything, very first thing you need to do is brew install. Once you do the first step, you'll say brew install Maven, right? That's pretty much going to install Maven for us. And then you'll say brew install Chrome driver, right? But now, sometimes what they do is, let's say Chrome driver may not be on this room called brew. They might move it to another, let's think of a package, but they will give you which command to run to install Chrome driver. So once you do that, and like I said, we'll do this together like in a smaller groups. So I don't want everyone to kind of run into errors now, and then it's going to be hard to solve it that way. So Deepak and I will help you on the second half of the class to install all of those stuff. The third thing is, so once we have our Chrome driver, so let's start creating a project now and let's write a test and we take it from there. So create a new project. So once you get to new project, so far we have been using Java, right? So now we'll be choosing a Maven project, right? And then you just hit a next here. And then we'll give some group ID name, and I'll explain you what those are in a little bit. So let's say group ID is called, I don't know, demo
So group ID must mean uncapital.
No, these are all should be lowercase, right? Actually, sorry.
We should create this project with you right now.
No, that's fine. Just follow what I'm doing. We'll do it together in a smaller group. That part I can't make it bigger. Sorry. It doesn't. Um, so we'll say. And then, is someone typing on the screen? Um, Deepak, I think it's through Zoom. Yeah, we have to get rid of this thing. Very weird taste on your drawings.
That's called art.
Um, uh, Deepak, I'm going to cancel the meeting and join back again. I think it's from someone accidentally probably type this. Everyone, I'm joining in like 2 seconds. Yes, yes. So once you create the project, we get to this landing screen, guys. Let's everyone please let's just follow a little bit, and then just enable the auto import. Now I'll explain you what that is a little bit. So we get to this landing screen, right? So this is called pom.xml, where we actually pretty much add all of the dependencies here. So anything configuration related about your project that needs to be shared across everyone, we will be adding it on that file. So how do we get the Selenium WebDriver project, library, into our project? So this is what we have to do. Let's search for Maven repository. Okay. And then we do this, and we'll type for Selenium. So this library, this place has all of the Java library, external library that is built to use, right? So we'll say Selenium. This one is called Selenium Java, right? There's a bunch of different ones, and we're gonna use one of the older one that is very stable. So 3.5.3. I don't like to always update to the latest because there might be bugs there and it can hurt you. So if you don't really need to update it, use one of the older version, and once it gets stable, you want to move on to the newer versions if you have to, right? So we'll get this dependency in here, and then let's say we go to properties. So this is called XML. You don't have to deal with this too much. Dependency. And then we'll add the dependency. So this is kind of the parent object, which is dependencies. And then inside of it, you want to add the external libraries that you need to add. Make sense? So like I said, this is, you're probably never going to touch this. Wherever you go, it's already probably going to be configured for you, right? But if you're building a new project somewhere, you're going to have to do this thing. We need another library called testng, and let's get that one. And then slowly this is going to continue to grow, right? We need APM libraries, we need Cucumber libraries, Gherkin libraries, so many different ones. But for now, those are the two we just need for next couple of weeks. So we'll set testng, and I think I'm using 6.10. Again, you'll copy this piece. So when you first run your test, or when you first run your code base, it will go into that website, grab all the code base, and install it on your local machines for you to use it. So tomorrow, let's say if you need to change the version, all you have to do is change the versions. You don't have to keep getting everything, so it's easier to maintain it. Also, it dictates everyone uses the same version. When we share this project, let's say in GitHub or something, right? Everybody's going to have the same version, so you're controlling the version. So let's say, if you're using a different version than me, you might run into different errors, or you might push something that is not supported with the older version. So it's very important that we are all, Maven will make sure of that. So now we've got two of those libraries. So those are the two we just really need to deal with, and that's it. So again, this is a package manager / build managers, right? So we'll be running our tests through Maven at some point, but for now, we'll still be running tests on individual file, all right? So the next thing is the source, right? We're really not doing anything with the main file, so we'll delete this thing. And then within Java, we'll create a new we'll just call it intro, right? And within intro, we'll create a Java class. So now going back to creating Java classes. And then the very first one, we'll just call it a sample test, right? And once we get here, remember we're accustomed to using PSVM, but very soon we won't be using that. Then once we get here, I would like to do a few things. Very first, I need to first set Chrome driver, right? And then web driver. And then go to URL http facebook.com, right? And then when you get there, I would like for you to get the current URL. So you're gonna make sure you went to the right URL. So we're gonna do some sort of assertion here. But before you do the assertion, you have to get that URL that we have, that we just currently landed on. So get the current URL, and then you want to verify here. So your last steps should be your verification steps. So you have your setup steps, and you have your action steps, and then you have your verification steps, right? So what we're going to be doing here is verify if URL is correct, right? And then finally what you want to do is you want to quit Selenium WebDriver. So once you're done with your work, you have no reason to keep the browser open. You want to bring it down, right? So those are the things we want to do. So let's see. Very first thing what we can do is we have to do something called. So you have to tell your system, you have to tell your code base, where is this Chrome driver? Remember, you cannot communicate directly to the Chrome. It has to proxy through Chrome driver, so they know that this request is coming through a secure channel, right? So once we do this, we have to first install Chrome driver. So let's assume we installed it through those brew Chrome driver install. The way you find out where it is, you can just say which Chrome driver, and it gives me the path of where the Chrome driver is stored, right? I hope this is the correct path, but we'll try this path. If not, it might be in other locations. So let's see. We need to first set this up. We'll say system dot set property, and I think you guys did the hash map, right? So you have a key value pair here. So once you do the set property, you have to set a key, and then you have to set a value. So the key is simply means WebDriver dot Chrome dot driver, and then you specify the path where the driver is. That's it. So now when your application is loaded, it knows exactly where the Chrome driver is. Make sense? You have to just do this once. You're probably never gonna look at this one. And then we need to initialize a WebDriver. But WebDriver is an interface. It's not a class, right? So we can't say WebDriver equals to new WebDriver because it's an abstract class, right? So interface is, all of the stuff is abstracted. So we'll say WebDriver, and now you see how WebDriver is available for me because we added the dependency. Otherwise, if you try in your project, it's not going to be there. So first, make sure you have to have the package WebDriver. We'll call it a driver, right? Equals to new Chrome driver. So that's what we're gonna call it. If it's a Firefox driver, it'll be a Firefox driver. If it's a Safari driver, and then you have to set the path to those clone drivers, right? That made by those companies so that you can use their browsers. So now everything has to be chained to this driver. This is the single instance. This is the initialization phase, and now we have to chain all our requests through that driver. So as long as the driver is live, we can perform actions, right? So the very first thing we want to do is we want to navigate to a specific URL. So first, let's create string URL equals to https facebook.com, right? And now we'll use the driver object that we just created. Everything, again, we have to do everything through the driver. If you remember the customer objects that we've created, anything that you wanted to do for that specific customer, it had to be within that object, right? So don't create another driver and try to do things because now it's just different instances, right? So always try to create one initial, just do a single instance of a driver object and drive your test from there. So now you want to say navigate that to, and you pass in the string URL object. So it will take us to that browser. So let's see what happens now. We can try running this if it works. Okay, so it looks like it worked. Open the browser for us. It's not doing anything. It just went to the browser, right? It opened the browser for us through this code. It also went to the URL that we specified, but that's it. It's really just going there and sitting there. Let's do the next step. What we want to do is, but now I have to manually X this out. We want to get the URL from there, because ultimately the objective of this test is to compare two URL, the one I set and the one they're giving us, right? So we'll do another string, a current URL. And the reason I know these are string, because when I say driver dot get, you see when I say get current URL, and it gives me the data type is string, right? So therefore it's going to be string. But a lot of time it's going to be different things like session storage, connection type, local storage, right? These are different type of objects that we're not going to be dealing with very often. So, but for now, we'll get the get current URL. And so we have those two. And so here is a very interesting one. So now I need to compare those two, right? So you could write something like this. You could say, well, Mohammed, you could do something like this. Is URL correct, right? And then we can say URL dot equals current URL, right? So this does it. We are comparing two different strings, but that's not enough, right? You have to then write an if logic. If is URL correct, then self out task passed. Else task failed. Make sense? So imagine we have thousands of assertions we have to make. Are you going to do this? Right? So it's nonsense. So we're not going to do this. We'll be using a library to do this, right? So we'll remove all this code base, and it's going to be done in one line. So that's when we're going to be leveraging test-ng, right? So this is the other part of the Selenium doesn't have any assertions. Selenium just lets you perform some actions, but assertion has to be done through something called test-ng, right? So we'll say assert. Now you have to be careful here. There's another library that allows you to do this, but this is more of an older library called JUnit. But we're not going to be using JUnit. You're going to be using test-ng. So make sure where you're getting your assert from, because there's a lot of libraries that provides these things. It's a very common thing. Every programmer has to deal with assert when they're writing unit tests or anything like that. So there's a lot of libraries out there, but the one we're going to be using is called test-ng, right? It has a little bit better capability than the other ones. And then we'll use assert equals. You see what it says? So we'll just choose that. And now you pass in your actual expected first, and then your actual. Current URL, right? So this will pretty much do the comparison for us, right? We can check a lot of different assertions. There are like 5 or 6 that you're always going to deal with. But going forward, when you're comparing it, you're doing that, right? We don't have to write if-else logic. Everything can be written, but you don't want to build every little thing for yourself, right? So what we're going to do is let's run this test and see what happens. Right? Open the browser for us. But it's not, it's leaving the browser open for us, right? Which sucks. So we'll solve this, and now it's saying, hey, look, expected was www.facebook.com, but found there's a difference here on those two,
Slash.
right? So the slash at the end.
W.
We have to, so I always forget this one. Which one goes first? I think expected goes first. Let me do this thing. Let's run it again. Okay, let's see the error message. So expected, you see how we didn't have the slash at the end, right? But when it really went to the site, it found. So you want to put your current URL here and expected URL. I mean, expected value is the second value. I mean, if you do it vice versa, it would work, but it's just the error message is not going to look clean, right? So your actual value, which is when the driver is going there and getting the value for you, which we just did, you want to store that as the first value, and the second value should be the one you want, the expected value, right? So once we do this, now let's see, let's add this slash.
And also you add www.
Right.
www.
After. Slash.
And you see how all these like Chrome browsers kind of just popping out. It went through, so the process is passed, right? But we can even get letter. There's an optional. There's an overloading method. So assert equals are overloaded. There's like so many of those because you can compare int to int, double to double, string to string, object to object. But there's a third value as well for all of those. So let's say when an error occurs, maybe there is a message that you want to display, right? So unable to verify URL, right? So let's break this again for our comparison purpose. And let's close all these browsers. And we're going to write a code for this in a few minutes. Alright, so let's rerun this, and it should fail now because we don't have the slash at the end. So now you get a little bit of cleaner message, right? Unable to verify URL. Expected was this, but found was something else, right? So the third value, I really like this value so that you can really understand what your error is for. Kind of like how we did it with exception, right? But if you really see how they build it, it'll probably be something similar. Now the last step we're gonna have to do is driver dot quit. So what quit will do is so now you don't have to, I mean, it's not going to leave it open for you. But there is a problem with quit, right? So let's say something fails. So now the test is going to fail. There's a problem here, right? So as soon as the test fails, that means that script kind of ends there, right? Which sucks. So now your browser is going to be left alone, and if you run it again, there's going to be another new browser and so many different browsers. So these are the problem we need to solve. We can solve this a few different ways, right? So let's start solving some of those problems. So maybe there is certain things you want to run before class, kind of like your setup code. Before your test, I want to do certain things. And then I perform up my test, and after my test, regardless if it passes or fails, I need to do something else. So there's 3 layers, right? So we'll do before class, public void. And this is coming from, always remember to bring this from test.ng, right? So it's come from test.ng, public void. For actions, and then you want to perform your test. What am I doing? Void verify URL. Okay. And then your last method would be after class, public void after action, or we could just call it tear down, right? So now we want to do a couple of cool things. You want to take this piece of code. We can take all of these. Let's take all this code base, cut it, put it on before action, right? Because we are setting the Chrome driver, we are navigating it to the driver, then we're going to the URL. But there's a problem here. We need to make this driver, a field variable, so we can share across different methods, because otherwise it's became a local variable here and it's trapped within before actions, and you can never get it into your test, right? So we're gonna have to do something like this: a private driver equals to, just set it to no, and then we'll just get rid of this here, and now it's available for you. We also have to do the same thing for the URL, right? So URL is something maybe we could just set it on the top, because that's also needs to be shared so we can compare between 2 of the results, right? Go to the URL, go to the driver, and then we initialize it. Now, what we want to do is we want to move these 2 lines into our test, because that's really your test, right? You're getting the current URL and you're comparing it between your setting the URL that you set with and the URL you're just kind of getting right now. Okay. And then the last line of code would be, so regardless if the test passes or fails, you want to be able to quit the browser. So we are no longer going to be using main method again. So we don't have to use main method. Every time we need to run a code, we will just use a test annotation method, okay? Test annotated method is what we're going to be using. Let's just compare that. So let's see if it works. One more walkthrough. We are initializing, we are declaring the driver here. We are setting the URL. We are also comparing We are also in the before class. We are setting the property for the Chrome driver. We're initializing the Chrome driver here, and then finally going into the URL, and then finally here on your test class, you're actually getting the current URL and then doing the comparison using that. And then finally, you're doing the quit. So now, regardless if your test passes or fails, it's going to be executed for sure, right? So let's run this. Oh, something happened. Again, the comparison went bad, right? So, but your browser kind of came down now, regardless it fell, because this will get executed regardless if the test passes or fails, right? And so forth. One more thing I want to kind of cover.
You don't need a main method for this.
No, so we're no longer going to be using main methods because the testng library will provide you that, right? Everything okay, guys? Something funny? Okay. Any questions so far? Is that
Red means something error, yeah.
no, it might not be error. It's just it's just saying you can run your test from here. Okay. Do you understand like how we're gonna do the coding? That's that's kind of a bit. But do you understand the workflow? What happened?
Yeah.
We had to create a Maven project, and then we had to add a dependency for WebDriver and testng, and then we created a class inside of wherever inside of your Java project. I mean, Java test, Java intro path, right? We created some sample test here, and then you had a before class, and then you had a test, and you had an after class, right? I mean, we're not done yet. It's gonna get much more simplified, right? So just one step at a time, so you know where we are going, right? What's your question?
Why is it importing at test and after class? Like it imports these things if you go on to see it says import after class, import before.
Yeah, because these are think of like these are different methods, so to speak, right?
But before them we created methods, we never imported anything.
This is different. This is a special type of method. It's the annotated functionalities, right? So we can also just do like a star after this and get everything. But I like to do this so you can kind of see which library it's coming from.
Before you did the whole thing, wasn't the step before this a little more simplified? Like you're getting into more. This is more detail oriented.
Yeah, but that's more. But it's not scalable. What we had because when the test failed, your driver left open. Your browser, your driver is not quitting. So when you try to run another test, it's going to get lost. Now you have two instances of driver, right? So it doesn't know which browser to kind of touch because you have like 3 or 4 of them open. So yes, it may look easier to see, but that's not scalable. What we want to do is more object oriented again. We wanted to do some common functionality before because see, now that you have this, you can write hundreds of tests and you're going to be leveraging the same code base, which we're going to do in a little bit now, all right? But do we understand the workflow? That's what's important right now.
Why did you declare the web driver as null? Can't you just declare it in the before class?
Well, if you declare it in before class, it's trapped. It becomes a local variable for this method. Does that make sense? So if we did this, if you focus, you're really talking to Bobby today, right? So we need to really focus on these things, otherwise we are going to be lost. So let's say we did this. But the problem is now the driver is trapped here, right? You see how this one's not finding the driver? Because it's not field variable, it became a local variable to before action method. Does that make sense? Right? All these annotation does is that it tells the compiler, make sure to run this method before you run anything, right? And then we run our test methods, and then we run our after class method. That's all that is. But you see how the driver is red now? Because it's not finding the driver. Make sense? So that goes back to, see, there's no such thing as selenium, so to speak. You have to understand Java, right? So that goes back to all our exercises last, month and a half or so plus that we went over is, everything has to be object oriented based. Otherwise, these codes are not going to run. But I'm not happy just yet, right? What we have to do is we have to simplify it a little bit better, right? Because now you might say, well, Mohammed, if you create another test, I have to keep doing this over and over, right? So let's say we create another test called verify invalid login, right? So how do I open my browser now, right? Because I can't open my browser. I have to still do the before class, after class. We don't want to do that. We want to be able to just create one common class, right? One common class and inherit it on all the test classes. So the before and after will always be there for you without you having to do anything, right? And what we're going to do is we're also going to have a getter for driver. So because ultimately you still need the driver, right? So we can get that driver back into our. So we'll have to get that driver back into our actual test. So let's see if we can do this in next 10 minutes. So we'll create a new class, and it's a common class, right? So we'll say Java class. I like to call it driver factory, right? Because we're going to be adding a lot of stuff here. Right now we're just kind of in the early stage, so we'll call it driver factory, and we'll grab all of these things. Okay. Let's just do it here. Now, except we're going to get rid of test because test is not part of this, right? It's only the common functionality that is shared across all tests, right? There could be other things that we may want to share. And then here, we'll say private static. And then now, I would also like to create a getter for that. Also private static. Even though they're static, I like to have a getter to reach them because, all right. So every time we initialize it, this will become live for us, right? So now if we go back to our test, let's hide this. If we go back to our test, I would like to get rid of all of these things. You don't have to worry about this. So look how cleaner it's getting, right? It's getting simplified. Now we say extends. What is it? Driver factory, right? And we need to call it get driver, and then here we'll call it get URL, right? So you're really not seeing any, nothing hard coded, so to speak, right? Everything is kind of abstracted. So now if you run your test, it should still do the same thing. Okay, we have an error with same error, right? So let's do one passing one. So let's say get URL. Let's go to the example test. What I'll recommend for you to do today's homework is not to do any new things, just whatever I did, try to copy, like watch the video, try to copy, move things around so you know what you're moving. Because if you just copy paste this, you might not know how it's working, right? So I will not give you any hard homework. It's just gonna be going through the video, pause it, copy it, run it, see every step, ask yourself what's happening here, right? So that's gonna answer a lot of the questions. But seeing me code may seem a little bit easier, right? But when you're actually even copying it, you'll see you're making some mistakes, or you're not initializing a field variable, or you're not inheriting something and trying to call it. So that's going to stop you a little bit and move faster. But any questions on these things so far?
When we use before class and after class, it means try catch or
Do you see a try catch?
try catch?
No, there is no try catch here.
But
There's,
it looks like
what do you mean? Don't confuse yourself with something how they implement it, right? What we really need to understand here is what is the purpose of before class, right? So don't confuse yourself with try catch. When we have to deal with try catch, we'll introduce try catch, right?
okay.
How someone build it before class and after class, that's not our concern at this stage, because that's abstracted. Remember when we talked about abstractions, right? If you start questioning how everything is built, right, then you're just going to be lost as that thing, right? So we need to really kind of leave that alone. It's like when you're driving a car, you can't focus on how engine is working, right? Or how engine is built, because that's not the goal here. The goal is you need to understand what is the purpose, what are you trying to accomplish. We're trying to write some automated tests, and we need to build a core framework that supports it, and we need to simplify these tests. And these are the libraries that's going to help us, right? So to be honest with you, your things are gonna get easier now, because now that you understood how Java works, right? Well, I think understood, right? Uh, this is gonna make sense more now. So even your Java concept is gonna get clearer and clearer, right? Because now you see how we extending a driver factory, right? So you automatically kind of know the reason for inheriting this, right? Because these are the two common functionality that has to happen regardless what kind of test it is. If you don't open a browser and if you don't close a browser, these are two common functionality we have to do. So it's better if we inherit that. Um, so when we come back from break, around 8:20, we will do one more scenario, and then you guys can go to the installation.
I have one more question.
What's up?
Every time we have new project, do we have to spawn.xml?
No. You don't, and also don't keep creating projects now, right? Just use the same one. If you have a homework to do, just create a new package and just do the homework inside of that, right? But once you create one project, like let's say Selenium demo, just work on that. Why? There's no need to create new projects every time, because you're gonna mess something up, and then you're gonna spend more time figuring that out than actual engineering, which is the scenario, right, that you want to work on. Make sense? Any questions from online?
So Mohammed, you created WebDriver is equal to new Chrome driver, right? So initially you said it's an interface. So we don't use anything such as like implements or
No. So yeah, even though it's an interface, because we are not implementing WebDriver. We are creating an object that a WebDriver is derived from, right? So like let's say Chrome driver, whoever built the Chrome driver, they implemented WebDriver. Make sense?
okay, so it's same as like we're getting a that calendar from
Right. Remember, I think we did
yeah
it like a calendar or date.
yeah yeah
We had one type of that was the object, but we initialized it with the subtype.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's
It's
same.
like a subclass.
Yes. So Chrome driver will be a subclass of a WebDriver interface.
Okay.
All right. But whoever built Chrome driver, they had to do something like public class Chrome driver implements WebDriver.
I see.
Okay.
What's means the result?
Any
Show.
everybody how
It says the default start one test and
Where?
the terminal shows some result.
I don't see it.
Can you run again?
Actually, first time they ran. एक बार अभी है भी
This one. Before side.
Oh, it's just telling you how many tests ran, how many failed, how many skipped. We just ran one test.
It's automatically.
Yeah, there is that.
information, yeah?
The test NG does that for us. We're not doing anything.
It's magic.
Yeah.